Hello, everyone. I am Naomi Wang, Curator for Southeast Asia and Peranakan Art at the ACM. Welcome to today's session where our Director Kennie will share some behind-the-scenes content for our completed multi-year museum revamp, as well as his personal journey of being a museum director. Importantly, this session will also be the first time we will share on ACM's new positioning and curatorial direction as Singapore's National Museum of Asian Antiquities and Decorative Art. Last, accompanying this talk is the launch of a new book, Director's Choice Asian Civilisations Museum by Scala Arts and Heritage Publishers. On behalf of ACM, Kennie, please.
Thank you so very much, Naomi, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to ACM Talks. I'm so glad to be able to see so many old friends in the audience today. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen at this point. View full screen. Naomi, can I get a sense if the screen is up?
Yeah.
All right, good. Thank you so very much. As Naomi has said, those of you who know us well would know that in the last 7 years, we've been undergoing a very dramatic refresh of our mission, as well as all the permanent galleries of the ACM. It's been a very challenging journey. And so I want to start off first by giving thanks. Thanks to our chairman, Mr. Lo Lik Peng, and members of the ACM board, as well as all of our patrons and donors who have been unstintingly supportive of this entire journey. I want to thank our wonderful and extremely passionate docents and volunteers who have been with us every step of the way as we sort of transitioned. I want to thank the public who has been very patient with us and who has, again, been very open as to how we have moved and changed over the years. And lastly, but most importantly, I want to thank the ACM team, which is, in my view, the most passionate and professional, and certainly the best museum team I've ever worked with in the world. I love you guys so much. Thank you so much for being sort of part of this journey with me. Also, before I begin, I would like to thank the Chris Foundation for being a sort of a generous supporter for the ACM talks. So just as by way of qualification, so today I'm going to talk about ACM. Of course, ACM also runs Peranakan Museum, but as Peranakan Museum is under renovation right now, what I've decided is I'm going to use another session at some point once we're closer to when Peranakan Museum is going to reopen to talk about Peranakan Museum. So I won't really talk about TPM today. It will be primarily about ACM. Since this is the very first talk I've actually given in Singapore, strangely, about ACM and my being the director of ACM these past few years, I thought I would just give a little, provide a little bit about what my background is. I do get asked this question, how does one become a museum director? I don't really know, but what has really helped me this time is I guess the fact that I have had a sort of a multidisciplinary background. And in the museum scene today, anywhere, this move towards multidisciplinarity, sorry, I can't pronounce that, is quite real. So we're shifting towards that direction. So in a nutshell, I have, my background is these. I have a degree in English literature and economics from the University of California, Berkeley. I have a master's degree in urban sociology from Goldsmiths College in London. So I've always gone to these sort of slightly more left-wing, slightly more individualistic universities. I did my national service in the Singapore Armed Forces Music and Drama Company. I was an artiste, so I sang, I danced, I have training in contemporary dance. I acted, and also I stage managed. And then I started my professional career in the Ministry of Information Communications and the Arts, the former MICA, where I was doing cultural policy and strategy. So I think the biggest thing that I did was the Renaissance City Plan 3. I essentially conceptualized, consulted for it, and almost practically wrote it. I took a gap year and went away to sort of wander and find myself. And then I came back and joined the National Heritage Board, where I was the essentially the chief operating officer, responsible for all things that was corporate, including finance, HR, estates, IT, audits, marketing, etc. This was really important in terms of my learning how to run a large cultural organization. At the same time, I also started what I really love to do, which is to explore the port cities of Asia. So by the time in 2016, when I was just before I took over as director of ACM, I had already traveled to some 40 Asian port cities where I spent my time obsessively photographing and documenting the historic architecture and streetscapes of these cities. My photography is not so great. It got better as I went along. And of course, in each city, I would research and read up and sort of learn as much as I can about these port cities. So this is my first love. And of course, I've had a couple of books published. The first one came out in 2015 on the port cities of Southeast Asia. I had another book out in 2015, which was on the history of heritage policy in Singapore. This was a peer-reviewed book. It was commissioned by the Institute of Policy Studies to do this. At the same time, before I knew I was going to be ACM director, I already agreed with my publisher Talisman that I would do a book on Singapore 1819. I wrote the book while I was director of ACM. It was very challenging, but what happened was then I explored Singapore heritage from the perspective of kind of like ACM, so global, cross-cultural, art historical, etc. I didn't stop writing. In 2019, I did this kind of a large article with the Cultural Academy, the Singapore story through 60 objects. I had the help of curators across the National Museum, so not just ACM and National Museum, but also National Gallery, SAM, the Botanical Gardens, National Library Board, etc. It really should be a book on its own because I worked so hard to put it together. But you can download this from NHB's website. And of course, last year during the lockdown, I worked on this book, the Scala Director's Choice book on Asian Civilisations Museum that we're launching today. So I just thought that I'd give you a background because I believe very firmly that my own sort of like crazy multidisciplinary background has a lot to do with how I have sort of, coped with and also shaped ACM's direction. So now to ACM. So I'm going to flash a couple of slides that are actually our sort of corporate deck. When we finished ACM last year, we were meant to sort of do a rebranding. We were going to launch our new brand and positioning. So these are the kinds of corporate slides that we would present to our, our donors and patrons and such. So I'm going to go through these very quickly because the rest of the presentation is meant to explain how we got here. So this is who we are. This is our vision. Basically, we want to be in all we try to do, we want to be the best in the world or the best that we can be. Our mission is to build bridges between cultures and people. And we try to find these links historically. And we try also to build bridges by way of cultural diplomacy today. This is our brand promise. This is very important because this is meant to cut through everything that we do at ACM. So beauty, wonder, relevance. Again, I won't explain too much here. It's meant to be apparent as I present. What we care very much about are craftsmanship, especially Asian craftsmanship. We're very interested in the cross-cultural, the convergence and the connections and interactions between cultures in Asia. And also, we're very fascinated by this question of identity. What is identity? Singaporean identity? What is Asian identity? What is Chinese identity? What is Indian identity? What is Southeast Asian identity? These are questions that I ask, and we ask in all the exhibitions that we do. Our collections on the ground floor, we present our collection of Asian export art on the theme of maritime trade. On the second floor of ACM, we explore the theme of faith and belief, and we present our collection of sacred and ritual art. On the third floor that recently opened, the theme of materials and design, and we present our collection of decorative art, although because the floor is so small, we're just focused right now on fashion and textiles, jewelry, and ceramics. And these themes are actually drawn from Singapore's essence as a multicultural, open, cosmopolitan, multi-faith port city and trading hub. So this is one of the key sort of causes, I would say, that we champion, the sort of ideas that we sort of position. We look at Asia through the lens of Singapore. And one thing new that that I've sort of brought to the table in our recent repositioning is this focus also on innovation in tradition, and the emphasis on this figure of the artisan as opposed to the artist. So the artisan, the craftsman, the maker, ACM, artisan, craftsman, maker, historically as well as in the contemporary day. So how have we evolved? We started off as an anthropological museum, ethnography and anthropological, during Kenson's time, my grand predecessor. And then we evolved into an Asian art museum during Alan's time, my immediate predecessor. And also we became the archaeological museum because we received the Tang shipwreck collection. So I think what we've done in this repositioning is we've sort of added on to this. We haven't invalidated anything. What we've done is sort of add on to this figure, as I mentioned, of the artisan. Because through all these things, there's the figure of the unnamed artisan who made the objects that you see in the museum. And I think increasingly, the focus on the artisan, the person, the people who makes these things is very important. Our principles, what I believe very strongly in, what I demand, the first is originality. So in terms of exhibitions, at least, I demand that our curators and the designers give us something that only we here in ACM in Singapore can do. So that means we often, we try to have original content. We always co-curate an exhibition with our exhibition partners. Academics are very important. I took a leaf from my predecessor, Alan, who very much emphasized academics. But academics cannot exist in a silo. So in all the academic work that we do, I insist also that we reach out and engage with academics, curators in Singapore, in the region, and in the world. Because our role, again, is to encourage just sort of building bridges and connections between people, between cultures and ideas right here in Singapore at the museum. And of course, aesthetics, as those of you who know ACM, is very key. Everything has to be drop dead gorgeous. Our roles in Singapore are derived from our curatorial themes. So we play a very important role in cultural diplomacy. By virtue of our maritime trade sort of function, but also because we're the only national museum in Singapore that is not so ostensibly about Singapore. We have a role to play in harmony between faiths and between ethnicities because of our faith and belief function, curatorial function. And of course, because of our materials and design focus, we are the only museum, I dare say, in Singapore that is focused on aesthetics and the importance of aesthetics from an Asian perspective. And fundamental to our what we do is also education and capacity building. Education of the public and our partnership with schools and in order to educate school children, but capacity building also for the larger creative and sort of artisan industry in general. All right, so that's a quick sum up. And I'm going to take us back to this point here, which is a very important exhibition, actually. It was the first exhibition that I opened as director, and this was really a turning point in some ways in ACM's history. It was very important because it marked, in some ways, our shift from the previous kind of more civilizational approach to a cross-cultural networked approach. I was not involved in this, but clearly I loved Port City so much, so it was kind of very fortuitous that the first exhibition I launched was this one. And I learned so much from our guest curator at the time for the show, Mr. Peter Lee. I think he's here today, so thank you so much, Peter. I learned so much from you at the beginning of my tenure here with this show. So this show was important, as I mentioned, because it marked a shift in our direction. In today's parlance, sort of technological parlance, essentially what Alan had did in the lead up to this exhibition was to cause a disruption in how sort of Asian art museums worked, from a kind of civilizational silo kind of way of presenting arts and culture to this sort of idea of networks. And I knew it was a disruption because when I took over the museum, although this exhibition did very well, there was everybody hated that shift. I spent most of the first year of my life actually sort of talking to as many people as I could. You know, I spoke to maybe 300, 400 people to get a sense of, what people felt about the museum and how we should sort of, move ahead. I knew this was the right way to go because this is my own passion, but for some reason it wasn't connecting with the general audience. That's why I say it was a disruption. I had people literally come up to me, people who were closest to me, who would say things like, bring back the old ACM, or why are you taking away the old ACM, etc. It was very disheartening. It was very, very challenging. At the same time, because we were in the midst of renovating the museum, I took over when we were just halfway through the major refresh of the museum. From a visitor experience point of view, it was very challenging. Our visitors couldn't understand what was going on. The museum was in flux all the time, and I had a huge amount of complaints as to, what is going on. Like, what is ACM going? Where is ACM going? It's like, it seems like it's like a disaster. Like, what is going on? I'm to sum up, I think in the course of talking to some 300 or 400 people, patrons, donors, board members, I gave a lot of tours, students, etc. I decided that this way to go was the right way to go, the port city's cross-cultural approach. But what perhaps was missing was the right positioning for it. How do we position this in a way that our public would understand? And so that's why we sort of, landed onto this positioning of, look, here, what we're trying to do is to present Asia through the lens of Singapore, to look at Asia by way of our port city identity. That seemed to work quite well. And I would say that actually it was younger people, younger visitors who accepted this very readily. Our older visitors did not. In fact, our median age actually dropped quite significantly between just before the time I took over, which was, our median age of visitor was something like in their 40s. And then just before we did the raffle show in 2018, it dropped down to in the mid 30s. So the younger people were getting this, that it was like, because we're used to social media networks and so on and so forth. So in short, it was such a pain. It was so hard. I went through so much, just, a lot of self-doubt, but I stuck to this path with a lot of support, again, from the board and from some of our very important donors and thinkers. This was the way to go. But that wasn't, there were also sort of highlights. It was really amazing. The first year or in a bit of my time. My second exhibition I opened was this one, opened by PM Lee as well as Daw Aung San Suu Kyi in Better Times. The third exhibition I opened was in New York. It was our 10 shipwreck exhibition in Asia Society. There was, and we were able to do this because of another predecessor of mine, Mr. Tam Boon Hui, who had moved to Asia Society at the time. And then the rest of the time, I just had obligations that I had to fulfill. We had to do these shows that we said that we would do. The Korea show, we were obliged to do it. And we had to open the permanent galleries bit by bit. So this was the Ancient Religions Gallery that we opened at the end of 2018. But then, sorry, the end of 2017. But then 2018 was when things started to turn. And I'm very lucky because from 2018 on, I started, that's when I actually had the chance to decide and to sort of propose with the curatorial team exhibitions from the beginning. Coming from a strategist and a sort of a book writer background, I like the big picture. I always like to sort of talk about things in terms of large kinds of large sort of overall plots, and then how individual pieces fit into the plot. And to me, I think what I wanted to do was to have exhibitions in terms of seasons. So while the museum was cross-cultural, our exhibitions would be seasonal and geographical. And so 2018 and 19 was our Southeast Asia season. And it was very important because what we wanted to do with that whole season, the year-long exhibit series, was to explore this question of what is Southeast Asia? What is Southeast Asian identity? It was also important because in 2018, Singapore chaired ASEAN. And again, with our diplomatic role, there was something that we felt we needed to do about this. So this is how we wanted to explore Southeast Asian identity. the idea that, what if, we tend to think of Southeast Asia as the place between East Asia and South Asia. What if it was not? What if it was actually the most important place on earth because it was the crossroads, right? So this idea of a global Southeast Asia. We have to address our colonial legacy, something we can't get away with. It was a difficult thing to do, but we needed to address it. And thirdly, we had to remind people that in Southeast Asia, there has been a tremendous and a sophisticated tradition of craft and of culture and of art historically. There were three sort of quote unquote exhibitions that were part of the year of Southeast Asia. There was Angkor, there was Southeast Asia and the World, which is basically just a way of us to position our launch of the new galleries. I have to try to make our launch of new galleries exciting somehow. And then the Raffles in Southeast Asia exhibition, which also coincided with the bicentennial celebrations. I'll take the Southeast Asia and the World opening first. These were our permanent galleries, as I said. It was diplomatic, so the opening of the galleries was attended by all the ASEAN ambassadors. But essentially it was me, I guess, trying to sort of position our, like, an obligation. Like I had to open the rest of the second floor galleries. And so how can we do this in a way that would sort of excite the imagination? So we opened our Islamic art gallery, our Christian art gallery, and the Ancestors and Rituals gallery with a focus on Southeast Asia and Southeast Asian artifacts in the galleries. This gallery is very important. I'm very particular about design. So my design brief to designers, was that this gallery needed to be an updated, a contemporary take on the old ACM. Our ethnographic museum. So the design needed to sort of be a take on an ethnographic museum, but a contemporary take on it. And then we had the two exhibitions, Angkor and Raffles. So Angkor was the first exhibition that I managed to sort of take, from conceptualization, initialization all the way to fruition. And it also represented the first time that my vision in terms of what a special exhibition ought to be came to fruition. And a special exhibition to me was the core by which there were different things that would appeal to different audiences. So of course, there was, you remember this, there's the main exhibition itself, which had to be absolutely gorgeous. It was a partnership with the Musée Guimet in Paris, but it was co-curated between ACM and the Guimet. Because it was, the pieces were coming from Paris, it was imperative that I fly into Phnom Penh to get the blessing of my counterpart, the National Museum of Cambodia's director, who's here. And he agreed to be part of our academic program. And as part of the exhibition package, I felt like an exhibition wasn't just an exhibition. It needed to have other things part of it. A contemporary art installation to reach out to new audiences. An international symposium. This was the first time that there was an international symposium as part of an exhibition. And after that, I insisted that every single special exhibition needed to be accompanied by an international symposium where we had academics from Singapore, Asia, and the world come together to talk about the latest research. Our gorgeous and also sort of, a gorgeous catalog, which also had, academics and curators from Asia, Singapore, as well as abroad, contributing essays. Our family and children interactive trail, as well as an interactive section that became a must. Our weekend festival with performances of intangible cultural heritage, Asian traditional performing arts on the riverfront. This became a must. And of course, our opening, which is diplomatic. So our openings since then have always been diplomatic. Here is the opening, the exhibition opened by Professor Tommy Koh, our ambassador at large, as well as the ambassadors for France and Cambodia. Again, this speaks to our role in terms of building bridges today. We repeated this for Raffles, everything, the whole package. What was different with Raffles was that it really, because it was Raffles, Singaporeans actually paid attention. So it was very well attended. This was a blockbuster show. A lot of people came. The show, part of the show actually then went to the British Museum, who was our partner for the show. It was the first time in the history that the British Museum had ever co-curated an exhibition with anybody. It was also the first time that anything from Singapore had been displayed at the British Museum. So we had our pieces at ACM displayed here at the British Museum. But actually, to me, the most important partner was, we had a lot of partners, was the National Museum of Indonesia. Again, without the blessing of the National Museum in Jakarta, I would never have done this show, because we are presenting cultural heritage that is not our own. It was of Java. And so I went down to make sure that they were okay. Again, this gorgeous catalog, the first catalog ever sort of presented, I think, and it was sold. It's still sold at the British Museum. The contemporary art installation, the international symposium that had some 400 people attend. We couldn't fit everybody in. We had to have another room and a live telecast. And I think actually a lot of the reason why our weekend festival, 35,000 people showed up that weekend. Normally we get 15,000 people maybe, but this was the most well-attended weekend festival ever for an exhibition. And I think a lot of the reason why this was a success was also because of our marketing campaign. I was being very, I took a lot of risks with this, and I got scolded a lot by a lot of parties. But somebody asked me about this. I'll tell you about that later. But this is why it was very successful. So we took the season of Southeast Asian art and we applied this to 2019, which was our season of Chinese art. And again, the whole point of this was to explore, these questions. What does it mean? What does Chineseness mean today? And more importantly, what does it mean to be Singaporean Chinese? 2020 was also the 30th anniversary of Singapore-China diplomatic ties. So these were the kind of ideas we tried to explore, aesthetics in the Chinese tradition, how innovation is not something that is modern, it has been happening for decades, centuries, and also this idea of re-educating people in terms of basics of Chinese art, so colors, motifs, etc. But always from a cross-cultural ACM sort of port city perspective. These were the shows that were part of this. There were 3 shows again, and 3 sort of other kinds of smaller or other kinds of shows, right? So 3 exhibitions, but also we had to open new permanent galleries, and we had the Tang shipwreck traveling to Shanghai. So the one thing I would say is 5 out of 6 of these were obligations. Again, it was back to things that I had to do because I had agreed with the donors or with China. It was a sort of diplomatic arrangement to do these things. And I was like, what could I do that would vary this mix? So I decided that we would go with the Guopei show. We did a press release for the entire season for the first time ever. And for the first time ever, we did it in Beijing, in Mandarin. And partly, again, it's because we wanted to show the Chinese that we could speak to them on their terms. I worked really hard to be able to sort of do all of this in Mandarin. Also I've always dreamed to be able to sort of tell everybody what we're going to do for a year in advance, because you look at other museums' websites and you're like, oh, we know what's coming up. But it's like, it's so hard because here we seem to not be able to know what's happening beyond like what's coming up in like 2 or 3 months. So this was important. So the Guopei show opened, and I think the key, a lot of people thought this was another disruption. Yeah, so this was kind of like how the Port Cities exhibition was a disruption. This was another disruption. But the key message that we tried to convey was still core ACM. And that what we're trying to say is this, that, our Singaporean Peranakan heritage is causing a sort of monumental shift and impact on contemporary popular culture in mainland China. What is shown here is that Guopei, the designer Guopei, was inspired by our collection, our Peranakan collection, to sort of recreate the tradition of being dressed in traditional wedding dress for your wedding. That had been killed during the Cultural Revolution. It was Guopei that introduced it back. It's now a big thing again. And it was due to our collection, which you saw in Paris during an exhibition we had in the Quai Branly, that triggered this. So I thought this was a very important point that we needed to make. We need to be proud of our heritage and how, even though we're so small, we're able to sort of impact the bigger sort of, impact the world in some way. But of course, it didn't end there. So, it also became a larger, we also talked about other aspects of Chinese art. So the exhibition became a kind of Chinese art 101, imperial art, export art, and, folk art, and, fashion and art, and how, in some ways, there was a dialogue between the two. But then, the one thing that most people may or may not have realized was this was actually a sort of encapsulation again of what ACM was, but disrupting it as well. So this was Peranakan Museum. This was Alan's museum, Alan's ACM. This section was about Asia and the world, Asian export art. Yeah, this was Kenson's ACM. Imperial art, Chris Hall, this idea of the old ACM, So all of ACM was there. But the putting it together in terms of things like, the circular narrative, I hate linear narratives. So you could enter either way, on either door of our special exhibition gallery, and the experience will be completely different. And then of course the gorgeous design, it had to be absolutely drop dead gorgeous. We tossed out certain designs. And then, this idea, the contemporary and the new, the contemporary and the traditional, the juxtaposition, this bringing in popular culture and the world, that was Kenny's ACM. So there was a change. This was the shift. But I think the point that I was trying to make was I did not throw out the bathwater at all. It was that how do I build on what my predecessors had left me, this legacy that I had, and bring it, speak to today's audience. Kenny also means this, the family and interactive, family and children, they're very important. We have to always find ways to bring culture to young people and families of children. And I insisted always as well that our interactive sections and the exhibitions will always be about craft, making things. That's very important, working with our hands. We repeated all of this with Living with Ink, the Tanzi Chor Show, classic collection of modern Chinese ink painting that was donated to the ACM by the family of the late Tanzi Chor during Kenson's time. It was curated by our brilliant curator, Conan. From a port city perspective, we explored the interactions between Shanghai, Hong Kong, Taipei, and Singapore, and how Singapore was so important. The Singapore collectors were so important in shaping a modern Chinese identity in art. There was a sense of drama and occasion. That's what I bring to the table. I love this idea of a sense of occasion, of drama, of theatricality, of performance. And of course, the exhibition had to be drop dead gorgeous. You could enter either door, again, the circularity of things. And I wanted the design to feature works of art floating in a sea of white. The designers did it. And I think my KPI, so to speak, is when you step into the exhibition, there is a point where the visitor always gasps. You gasp in awe and wonder. That's what I try to achieve in all the exhibitions. That to me is the most important KPI. This was meant to happen in May last year. It couldn't happen because of COVID, but this was meant to be accompanied by the opening of the third floor galleries. So this, diplomatic ties of China and our ties of Hong Kong. So we did open the third floor galleries with Chris Hall's collection of modern Chinese fashion, with Edmund Chin's very generous gift towards the renovation of the jewelry gallery. And in any case, almost half of the jewelry in there comes from Edmund anyway. And he's Hong Kong based, right? Hong Kong based Singaporean. And I also agreed with the Yuan Shaoliang family to do a sort of contemporary installation that accompanies the Palace Museum show. This was in a contemporary gallery. It only opened later that year. But as you see, there was meant to be a sort of bigger universe of things that surrounded the Ming show at the Palace Museum. So we opened this, and then this hit. 3 days after we opened the third floor. I'm not going to talk about what we did and what we went through doing this. It's just, it requires a whole other talk. And I think we kind of did that a few months back. But what happened was that we tried very hard to keep up morale the year that this happened. A month after the circuit breaker this happened, we won an award. I wouldn't talk too much about the award. I would just say that the most important thing about the award was that it kept morale up. I was depressed. We were all depressed. But this coming in, made the team at ACM, made everybody sort of feel like, we need to keep going, and we have the spirit and the energy to keep going. We had to shift to digital. Thankfully, before that, my wonderful digital team headed by Ian had already sat down with all the senior team at ACM to talk about how we translate our brand into our digital strategy. So you will see these things here, our guiding principles, element of wonder and surprise, blah, 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 strong visuals, etc., etc. This we applied to all the things that we did in the digital space. And we tried to be as experimental as we could. We had no choice. So everything from like programs to 3D gallery representations, to museum hosts, to collaborations with other parties in a digital space, to our lectures and international symposiums going digital. We did all of it. Amidst all of this, we managed to send the Tang shipwreck to Shanghai. It was the first exhibition that entered China during the COVID period. And I have to thank my wonderful collections exhibitions team for doing this. It was like just amazing. Kudos to my Wan Gui and her team for doing this. The exhibition also recently won an award. I think it was an award at the museum Oscars in China. And then of course we had this in November last year. We were identified. It's just kind of very cool. Again, kudos to Ian and the curators, the curatorial team who does this. Our Instagram account was pointed out by the New York Times as one of 5 Instagram accounts to must follow Instagram accounts. I'm not going to go into this because I don't have enough time, but I think that the numbers, and I don't like numbers necessarily. I feel like the impact should be about how the kind of content and the kind of radical innovations we're embarking on, but the numbers help in terms of seeking funding from private as well as government sources. But in all cases, we've done really well. Last year, we were meant to have a gala. It had to be canceled, but we made our targets anyway. And then, so for 2021, we thought that this would have to be the shift. This was already something we wanted to do before COVID, but COVID made it all the more important. The focus on our brand, because we had repositioned, and the focus on how do we bring the voices of people and communities into the museum. So last year, the Ming show was postponed. It couldn't happen. So this had to happen. I think some of you might remember this. We had to pull this out in 2 months. This is the 3rd disruption. Again, a disruption. It was an ACM show, ACM at the core. It was a permanent collection show. It was proposed by Clement, my brilliant curatorial team headed by Clement. But there was a huge shift in that instead of just the curators curating it, we decided to have people across the museum, so everyone from the security guard to our board members, including our student docents, to pick pieces across the museum collection that spoke to them in the course of the past year, when we had COVID and all. He had a gorgeous design. I told our designers, GSM Projects, they're the best, that I wanted a design that was heart-achingly beautiful, not heart-rendingly, heart-achingly, sorry, and I'm very specific about these things. And I think they delivered on this. It was just gorgeous. But I think what was most meaningful for me was that the pieces that were picked by people across our staff, not everything could go in. We did what we could. So the captions included the actual personal reflections of people across our teams. These are our designers. We included them. We had a digital kind of wall where we allowed any visitor to come in to pick the piece from the exhibition and also share their own thoughts about the piece, why it spoke to them. So I mean, I know that we have to go digital, but I always want digital and community to make sense. We have to think through what this means for us in a good way. So we all did this. This was my piece, a still hua piece, gorgeous. I love it to bits. And I think why we felt that this exhibition was so important because we all collectively went through a challenge in terms of battling COVID, but each and every one of us had our own personal challenge. So as I said, I think the focus for us going ahead was going to be people and communities. And I'm very pleased because FBLH did that. We were approached by, the interreligious organization. And we collaborated with the religious elders to pick pieces from our faith and belief florid collection that spoke to them personally. So they did an FBLH, and I think it was so radical. It was kind of a disruption. So we were working with the religious elders to put their thoughts on social media. I mean, like, it was radical. My radical doesn't mean offensive. Radical just is radical. And I thought that was just awesome, being able to sort of like put, this is the Parsi high priest in Singapore, talking about one of our Parsi Garas. and it was on social media, on Facebook and Instagram, which is brilliant. And then our wonderful Mandarin guides approached us to do a series, 100 Treasures of the ACM in Chinese, in partnership with us. And I'm so pleased to say this is going to be also co-published with Zaobao next year. So again, I thought that the exhibition precipitated this sort of, a very meaningful way of engaging with the community, that I thought that this had to be the way we moved on, given that all that we're facing in this situation, all the more the sense of humanity has to come through. Anyways, whatever it is, this is a permanent collection show. So the pieces have gone back to the permanent galleries, and you'll see also that there's these QR codes. So if you sort of scan the QR codes, you will get to the personal reflections that that were shared by all the individuals for the Faith, Beauty, and Love, Hope exhibition. In the meantime, my brilliant programs team that's headed by Barbara Frass have been sort of working on this idea of how do we look at radical ways to bring people and communities at the museum, but still stay true to tradition. So we've had this series of that celebrates our various kinds of festivals of faith and in Singapore, Crossing Cultures, wonderful kind of program where we bring all kinds of artisans in the performing arts space, and we also try to sort of find alternative ways to sort of bring our collections to people. So we have Nora here talking about medicine with wellness and health through some of our collections. This is something very radical and experimental. Our marketing team, this is sort of a brand promotion event, encouraged some of our local artisans in all spaces to sort of create new products based on ACM's collection, and these were sold at this sort of ACM bazaar or caravanserai that also in some ways promoted Singaporean artisans. So at this point, I think this is the right point to talk about why Asian art and Asian antiquities and decorative art. In some ways, this is because in the 4 years I've been at the museum, a lot of dealers, gallerists come to talk to me about putting on shows of Asian contemporary art. So I think it's very confusing to people when you say Asian art. They all think it's Asian contemporary art, like Chinese contemporary art. So I think partly to call a spade, and if you look at our collection, the majority of it is actually, if you think about it, decorative art. Furniture, fashion, textiles, porcelain, etc. And of course, there's sacred and ritual art as well. Going this way also allowed us to extend our time into the contemporary day, but in our own fashion. So we're not really in the space of contemporary artists, but we're looking at the space of what would the contemporary be in the space of antiquities. And so the third point here is that I think it's very important for us to celebrate the artisan, the fact that everything in the museum was made by somebody, and they're often unnamed, often, their livelihoods dependent on being able to make these things. And there needs to be a link drawn between the historical artisan and the contemporary artisan. And so it's important, since we are the only pan-Asian museum in Asia, for us to sort of remind everybody that it is important for us to celebrate Asian aesthetic excellence. What is aesthetics? What is excellence in aesthetics and craft from an Asian point of view? And that's why we went to this. And how do we sort of express this, the feature, this figure of our sort of approach in the contemporary day? I would say that everything we do in the space of the contemporary is still guided by our two causes. So our port city heritage, as well as innovation and tradition. And there are three ways we try to sort of look at the contemporary. The first is to celebrate master artisans in Asia. Singaporean artisans also can, because we too have our best in the world. We have to remember and celebrate our best in the world. But at the same time, we need to have the museum be a developmental platform for Singaporean artisans. We cannot forget that we are in Singapore and we have a responsibility for the artisans, just like the art museums have a responsibility for the artists. And then finally, I think there's a need to explore what us being a port city means today. What does it mean for us being sort of the only actually cosmopolitan Asian port city left? So you see that that this is expressed in a trio of exhibitions that are taking place right now. Of course, this show that is the follow-up actually to the Guopei show. The show with Russell Wang, with whom I've always dreamed of working with. He is our master treasure artisan and also a national treasure in my view. And it was important for us to sort of present how Russell's work in the context of historical Asian treasures. So in showing his work alongside, the treasures of woodblock prints, we're saying that, look, we have our treasures too, and it's important to celebrate that today. The show, of course, is in classic ACM style. It's circular. You can enter either door. It's absolutely drop dead gorgeous. And it's old and traditional and contemporary. And it's the kind of show that only we can do in ACM in Singapore. Nobody else. There's this. I don't know if you've been noticing, but I'm very happy to be partnering the Textiles and Fashion Federation in the Singapore Stories, which is Singapore's national fashion design competition. It began last year. This is the second year where ACM is part of this competition. But since it's the second year, I have actually demanded in some ways that ACM's collection be the creative inspiration for these Singapore and Singapore-based designers. So the finalists and the winner of the show has to have part of his or her collection directly inspired by ACM's collection. And in return, I will open up the vaults for them. And this is, I think this represents, again, our commitment to making sure that, not just that we are being a platform for local artisans, but also that the collection itself, which is so rich and so important, becomes a creative inspiration for artisans, craftsmen, and makers in Singapore and beyond. It is my dream that the collection becomes an inspiration for contemporary designers of all fields in Singapore and in Asia. This opens next week. It's a counterpart to Singapore Stories. Singapore Fashion now is our first exhibition in the space of Singapore contemporary fashion. And since we're doing this, we decided we cannot do this without the industry and the community. So the exhibition is actually curated by the brilliant students of LaSalle School of Fashion. And they've kind of curated the show in a way that is core, like ACM to the very core, but also a provocation of what ACM and what craft is. Of course, TAF is also part of this because the winner of last year's Singapore Stories is featured in this show, alongside other established and experimental Singapore and Singapore-based fashion designers. It's a very small show, but it represents, what we feel is very important, which is to talk about how Singapore too has talent. We have to celebrate this talent, but we have to contextualize this talent against Asia's rich cultural heritage. And of course, in our Fashion and Textiles gallery on the third floor, it's always important to contextualize all of this against what was happening historically. So we have this new display, Fashionable in Asia, which looks at it's pan-Asian, cross-cultural, and again, curated from the point of view of Singapore's port city cultural heritage. And it's meant to be a counterpart, a kind of a dialogue with Singapore fashion now. So watch out for it. What's next? Technically Yongle Wan Li, but I actually don't know if that's going to happen. I have no idea because the situation is worsening here in China, everywhere. I don't know if we'll be able to travel. So I don't know. I will have to update again on whether this is going to happen. We were supposed to have our Indian Ocean season after this, for spotlighting India. But I can tell you right now that the Indian Couture exhibition that was meant to take place next year is canceled. There's no way this can happen because we can't travel to Delhi. There's no way for us to travel between Delhi and Singapore. So we've already discussed with the designer, whom I love so much, that this has to be canceled. We don't know what's going to happen, so I'll update again. But I think that what might happen is that we're going to have to look inward again to look at what we have in Singapore, in the region. This is going to likely be the case for the future, as travel restrictions are not going to resume anytime soon. And so again, we have to sort of adapt, disrupt, and sort of change ourselves in order to survive. Peranakan Museum is going to be open in 2023. This was pushed back by a year because of COVID, but I promise you it's going to be gorgeous, and I'm going to have another talk about this when it opens. Okay, so the last couple of minutes, I'm just going to talk about this book very quickly. So the book is structured according to ACM's themes, so maritime trade, faith and belief, materials and design, but also Peranakan Museum. So there are 37 artifacts in there. It's in English and Chinese. There are pieces that are new acquisitions that are coming in to the galleries this year. You'll see them very soon, or pieces that were in the Faith, Beauty, Love, Hope show that were also new acquisitions. And then pieces that I love. This is my favorite piece. and of course, Peranakan pieces. So to end, I'm just going to leave you this quote that I'm going to read out as to what we stand for today. And basically at ACM, we want Singaporeans and visitors to be able to step into the museum with some of the best objects anywhere, and to leave with a deeper understanding of the long-standing traditions of craftsmanship that go into making these beautiful objects. Traditions that are very much part of our collective Asian heritage, but that also define and drive innovation in Asia today. Thank you so very much for hearing me ramble on, and I'm happy to take questions.
Right. Thank you so much, Kenny, for the very passionate and informative sharing session. We will now open the floor to questions, and we've already had one submitted by Lin Jia Ying quite early on in the during your talk. So I'll just read it out. Hi, Kenny. Thank you for your sharing. We are really fortunate to view these exhibitions at ACM all these years. What will be the next disruption that we can look forward to see?
I think I actually, because this came quite early on, I think I actually said that already. I think the next disruption is how do we bring people into the museum? How do we work with people? And I don't like this, I think people tend to bandy about this word community engagement. We have to define it in a way that makes sense for us, in a way that is meaningful. So we did that with the elders of the interreligious organization. We're doing this with the, and of course we continue to engage with the interreligious organization for our faith and belief theme. So for example, we're working with the communities to build up our gaps. I'm happy to say that we've been working with the Jewish communities to build up a section on masterpieces of Judaica that's opening soon. We're working with the Sikh community on the Sikh art pieces as well on the second floor. We're trying to sort of complete that also with a Parsi showcase, like a Zoroastrian showcase. And of course, in the space of materials and design, we decided that, the Singapore Fashion Now is a sort of experimental way for us working with the community to create an exhibition, but in a way that sort of makes sense and doesn't compromise on what ACM stands for.
Right. Thanks, Kenny. We have another question from Ida Lam. Since the Indian fashion exhibition is unfortunately off, how about one on batik?
Oh my God, I wasn't going to say this, Ida, but we are going to do a show on batik in place of the Indian couture exhibition. It's going to be called Global Batik. So we're going to, of course, have pieces from our collection and pieces from the region. So we look at historical batik, contemporary batik designers. I mean, I'm wearing Iwan Tirta. And also how batik has had a global footprint historically in terms of African batik, but also in terms of batik being featured in contemporary international designers today. So yes, we're going to do that in place of the Indian couture show. Thank you for the question.
Well, all very exciting. I'd like to bring up a question that was posited on Facebook by Natalie Pearson. Hi, Kenny. Can you please also share whether ACM will be displaying objects from the 2 shipwrecks found in Singapore?
I knew this question was going to come. I'm going to respond by saying that I'll get back to you in July, because I think the designers, the students in LaSalle, and my team has worked very hard on the Singapore Fashion Now exhibition that's opening next week. And so I want to focus my attentions on making sure that exhibition that opens next week, and the community and industry that's put its heart and soul into it actually gets properly its due sort of time of the day.
All right, and we also have a question from Sue. She says, I love the night events at ACM. Any particular thinking on those, and will there be more coming? Thank you.
It was a requirement. I do a lot of requirements. I'm terribly totalitarian, actually. I required our audience team to put on almost every quarter an intangible, a weekend festival in which there would be nighttime events. And part of the nighttime events would include a performance of traditional Asian performing arts on the riverfront. So they could be from Asia or from Singapore. And I think that's very important because it is our way of saying that traditional heritage and traditional performing arts has a place in the city So yes, I mean, we're supposed to do this every quarter, but then with COVID, I mean, of course we can't do it. But that's meant to be something that happens very regularly.
All right. Yeah, the questions and comments are coming in quite fast and furious. So I'll take the next one that's coming up by Daisy Chua. Kenny, 2 questions. You visited so many port cities. How did you fund these travels? And what does KPI stand for?
Um, you know, I work so that I have enough money to be able to fulfill my dreams. And so I funded them myself. I decided that I had to travel. And the reason why I went to travel, because I felt like I didn't know very much about Asia and Southeast Asia. In Singapore, you grow up and in school, you don't really learn very much. Today you do, today you do. Yeah, no choice. The primary school students have to come to ACM, you know. But in the day, I didn't know anything. So I thought the best way to do it was to just travel. So I funded everything myself. I mean, nobody funded me. Yeah. And sorry, what was the second question? Sorry.
What does
Naomi, what was that?
KPI stand for?
Oh, sorry, key performance indicator. So when you're seeking for funding, and my main job is actually to find funding from the government or from our donors and patrons, there's always this thing called key performance indicators. What do you show in return for that funding that, you know, demonstrate that, you know, the funding has gone towards something meaningful? Yeah. And there are many ways to do this. So, you know, footfall, and footfall is one, of course, digital footfall is one. All museums in the world have to present that. To me, I've always felt like the sort of the key performance indicator for myself, at least, is like I said, that idea that when you step into an exhibition, there is a point where you gasp, because exhibitions are emotional things as well as intellectual. So you gasp either because because you see something that is just it's just sublime, but also because maybe there's a storyline that's something you never thought about before. Another thing that is a key performance indicator for me personally is that everything that we do, we're always trying something radical, which doesn't mean offensive. It just means radical, something very different.
All right, perhaps you can take 1 or 2 more questions. Rani eBay, Rani says, great sharing. By the way, how do you make the young generation who are now too attached with the gadgets to visit museums physically? They tend to have shorter concentration spans when reading long texts.
I love that question. Thank you for bringing that up. That is actually a key strategy for me. I'm what is known as an Xennial. I'm at the cusp of millennial. And I'm very familiar with social media, and you know, I've been blogging for ages. So we've always been very digital, but digital in terms of design, curating for digital. So I think if you step into any exhibition at ACM, you will find that it's impossible to get a shot on your phone that is bad, and is deliberate. So ACM is curated visually such that when you step into the exhibition or the galleries, you always get a gorgeous Instagram or Weibo or whatever shot that you can post. And a lot of our exhibitions, so for example, the Guo Pei show went viral on Instagram. It was all over Instagram without us doing very much. When I went to Delhi to meet the first round, the Indian couturiers, they all knew the show was happening because it was all over Instagram. It's the same for a lot of our shows. It's all about sight lines. It's all about framing. And it's all about us actually recognizing that, you know, we think that young people with their Instagram and whatever is actually, you know, these are young people, but actually that's a very sophisticated way of communication. You know, visual communication is much older than textual and verbal communication. And oftentimes when you communicate something through an image, you communicate to your emotions. So a lot of the way we curate exhibitions tends to be a lot more visual. We think very carefully how lighting works, how design works, how placement of objects works, such that the frame moves you. It communicates something. It communicates either awe or discomfort. And you know, I think again, you know, I feel like we've been better at I mentioned that our median age has dropped quite significantly, because these ideas of visual communication, of networks and flows, they work really well with younger people who understand that. So our museum is eminently Instagrammable, but I hate this idea of having this is the place where you Instagram shot. No, every single shot in the exhibition, you know, like a film set, is planned out. Every minor detail is a major decision. was said by Stephen Sondheim. Yeah.
All right. We'll take two more questions if that's okay with you, Kenny.
Yes. Yeah.
The first one from Tan Kun Xiang. This presentation is absolutely drop dead gorgeous. Kenny's conceptualization is a winner. Disrupting yourself is the way to go. Would ACM reach out to Chinese Peranakans to tap on the rich heritage of artifacts still held in dusty cupboards?
I think we already do that. We've always been doing that. And I'm gonna, as I said, I think it's to give Peranakan Museum due justice, due time. I would probably need to do a session just on Peranakan Museum. But in the course of putting together and revamping Peranakan Museum, our curatorial team has been reaching out to a lot of people. So I think you know, I'm very much about sort of talking to people and getting views. We may or may not take everyone's views, because I mean, that's crazy. How do you like take everybody's views? We try to listen to everybody, and then we make a decision as to how we're going to go. So I would say yes, of course. I would also have to point out that the Chinese Peranakans are just one Peranakan community. There are also the Chedi Malacca, the Jawi Peranakan, and although they're not technically, they don't technically fall under the Peranakan communities per se, I feel like we can't leave out also the various sorts of Eurasian communities. So I think I mean, the short answer is yes. I mean, I think we are have always been sort of talking to communities about the new museum. We may not take everything in your dusty cupboards. I'm sorry. We have a very because of the donors and the patrons that we've had over these past years, we have an excellent collection of some of the most beautiful things on earth. And so I would say that we would only take things where they would actually plug a gap in our collection. We have so much that we can't wait to display. Again, thanks to our donors and patrons. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Kenny. And the last question is coming from Lily Chung. She says, thanks, Kenny and ACM. I have a question of definition of Asia, and she would like to ask this in person. So we've already unmuted Lily.
Sure, yeah, Lily. Hi, Lily. Hi.
Hi, Kenny. Thank you for doing this. This was really good to see so many years of the things that you've done, and congratulations. In your mind, does Asia include Australia and New Zealand? And if it doesn't, do you also go into the Pacific Islands and talk about the cultures that are there and the artifacts that are there? That might not be very highbrow, drop dead gorgeous the way that you've described it, but it's certainly beautiful to the people there. I don't think I've seen you do a show on that, but sort of the indigenous or vernacular art of the islands, Aboriginal art, if you want to call it that. Does that cross your mind? First of all, does Asia include Australia? Lily,
first of all, I would say that you can't say that these pieces there are not drop dead gorgeous. I think that's not right. I think they're drop dead gorgeous pieces, you know, also.
No, I meant that. It's just it's a different kind of drop dead gorgeous. Yeah,
and I know I'm just, you know, I'm just saying that, you know, if you look at our Ancestors and Rituals gallery, you know, the pieces, traditional. So I think okay, wait, let me just answer that in a couple of ways. The first is that we tend to take Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands from the ethnographic point of view, and that these are works of ethnography. And I feel like as a broad sweep, you know, we need to also look at these pieces as works of art, because as you go into our Ancestors and Rituals gallery, it's the same thing with these pieces that come from the various islands in Southeast Asia, in our Jewellery gallery as well. And the point that we always try to make is that we cannot forget that there are sophisticated traditions of making things, you know, these things, and they're actually just, they're beautiful. So so that's one. I just wanted to say that you know, I believe that there are drop dead gorgeous things everywhere. Secondly, the definition of Asia. Asia is a European construct. Let's just put it that way. And I think ACM's definition of Asia is very lax, because if you think about it, it's not just about Asia as geography. It's all about Asia being at the center of world trade and exchanges. So it's about Asia and the world. So we have things in here also that are from elsewhere. We also eventually want to explore this question of Asian diasporas. So, you know, why not the Asian Americans, say, right? So we're trying to take a very broad view of what Asia is. To me, I do think that, you know, Asia, and okay, again, I don't want to say anything, but to me, I think Asia should include broadly everyone around the Indian Ocean, because the Indian Ocean, so you have Australia and New Zealand on one end, but you also have the Swahili coast up to Cape Town, right? So that's kind of the Asian sphere of influence, so to speak. That should be our ambit. We're trying to work towards it. We have had an Australian exhibition before. It was Ghost Nets of, it was a contemporary art exhibition with the communities of the Torres Strait. And it was opened by PM as well as the Australian PM. So we have had that before. I think that I would be very frank to say this, that I think a lot of times the reason why we choose to do exhibitions that we do oftentimes come from a mix of things. How do we best get funding to do what we need to do? How, and diplomatic. So what kinds of diplomatic sort of imperatives we have to address at any one point. And to a certain extent, also our position in Southeast Asia. So another thing that you would notice is that even though it is a Chinese season of Chinese art, is always from Southeast Asia first. The question that we ask is always, what is Southeast Asia's role, or Singapore's role in the context of larger Asia? So let's say the Guopei show is all about Peranakan culture, and it's Southeast Asia and its impact on Chinese art. In the same way, when we worked for the Indian Ocean season, it was, you know, the designer would have come and sort of created pieces and looked at, again, the interaction and the role of Southeast Asia in the context of the rest of the world. So I would say, yes, there's nothing stopping us from doing it, but it would always have to be from the position of looking at Singapore and Southeast Asia's role in broader Asian as well as global narratives.
All right. Thank you, Kenny. Lily, I hope that answers your question. So we're way beyond 8 p.m. now, and so thank you all so very much for being with us here today. Thank you, Kenny, for sharing your views with us. And to all our participants, please help us improve your ACM Talks webinar experience by scanning the QR code on your screen, which will be flashed for the next 2 to 3 minutes. Thank you so much, and have a very good evening ahead.